So this brings me to the highlight of this German book, Still Lost in Panama, at least for us, and it is the author's attempt to dismantle the Pandilla theory of Jeremy Cried and of Margarita. Honestly, this chapter had us chuckling and in bewilderment. And this is honestly where Dave in Power Pixie and myself started to see red. And I go into all of this in a lot of detail in my blog post. The link is below this video. But so just another quick summary. We know from Jeremy Cried's podcast that the mother of this murdered lad, Osman Valenzuela, she talked with a member of the Pandilla before he himself was actually murdered. And this Murgas, he claimed to her that Osman had been murdered by the Pandilla because he had seen Chris and Lisanne with the Pandilla in town on the day leading up to their disappearance. And he also knew ultimately what happened to Chris and Lisanne at the hands of these Pandilla members, including the stepson of tour guide F, including Edwin, including Cuervo, including Milagros, and some other people. But Osman, he was a bit of a wannabe. He wanted to be part of the group, but he never really was. Murgas says that it was his Christian faith and character that made him struggle with all this knowledge, and he was probably seen as a liability by the group, as Margarita also said in the press that he had been very nervous, very anxious, very erratic days leading up to his death, and he was very afraid. So this is all cast aside by the Germans. They don't even try to really explain why Osman had been so anxious if it wasn't for the Pandilla. They just basically insinuate that these people are all liars, which really didn't go down well for us, but anyway. Basically, what she does, Annette Nenner, she went to Boquet, Christian Harding House, stayed in Germany, and did the research of all these case files. And Annette, because she already lives like a nomad in different places and has no fixed address in Germany, she spent some time in Panama, in Boquet. And she managed to meet Guide F, have various hikes with him, talk with him about this case, and we assume that it was through him that she actually managed to speak to some of these former Pandilla gang members, which Jeremy Cried also tried but failed. So this chapter is about the talks she had with them, and the authors presented really as a really exclusive, important piece of this story. And they believe that whatever the Pandilla told Annette, which I'll get into now, completely disproves the Pandilla theory by Jeremy Cried, shows them to be liars. And they also go into this swimming photo, which I wrote a lot about on my blog. And they say that the Pandilla interviews will also tackle that photo. Margarita explained that the Pandilla lads were bad news, that they sold cocaine and marijuana, that they wielded power, and according to Margarita, Osman told her shortly after the disappearance of Chris and Lisanne that he had something important to tell her, that he was having some trouble with the young man in the Pandilla. Quote, he tells me, Mom, they're telling me they're going to kill me. So I ask him why, and he tells me, because I saw the Dutch girls in the car. From the podcast also. Then, after Chris and Lisanne disappeared, his friend Milagros told Osman that she knew they were dead and that the Pandilla was responsible. Margarita claims that Milagros also told Osman exactly what they did to the Dutch girls. And after that, threats began. Osman told his mom, because I saw them with the Dutch girls, they're going to kill me. And then 2 days later, they killed my son, according to Margarita. So this is presented as a link between Chris and Lisanne, their disappearance, the death of Osman, and then the death of Murgas actually, which is completely denied by the German authors, that link. Instead, I'm just surprised because they're so sharp when it comes to attacking the Dutch authors or Betsida Pity, but now they play this silly game and they write that there's no connection because actually Chris and Lisanne were not visible in the swimming photo, which shows, well, We'll get into that. But Annette also talked to Margarita shortly, and Margarita said that Chris and Lisanne were not at the caldera to swim with the Pandilla. No, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they're not connected to what happened to Osman. It doesn't even mean that they're not in the swimming photo, because we don't know when that photo was taken. They don't provide any evidence of that. But if this photo was in fact taken on April 4th, as they say, then they couldn't have been in the photo because they were already missing. So we're not saying that there is a link, we're saying it should have been investigated properly. So the interview with his Pandilla members, it's directly linked to the aim of the German authors to explain away the swimming photo. And I know that barely anyone gets the shivers from that swimming photo like I do. Posted about it on my blog quite a lot. I think its quality indeed leaves a lot to be desired, and I know that many do not believe the relatives when they said that the photo is real and not a photoshopped version, but that it shows two other girls. But I believe that we're seeing Chris and Lisanne in this photo, in this poor quality photo, having some carefree social time with guys their own age, just like they did in KOUDEKAAS. Juan and I researched the swimming photo as soon as Juan received it. He also published it, and we believe that it shows from left to right Chris, Lisanne, Osman and Murgas. So all four have died. But Annette Nenner, she spoke with the Pandilla group and with Feliciano's stepson after first befriending him. And Henry was rumored actually in Cried's podcast to have been involved in this disappearance, in the murders of Chris and Lisanne, as well as in the murders of Osman and perhaps even Murgas. But Annette comes with different information through these Pandilla members. She manages to speak with most of them. Only Edwin Aguirre, he refused to meet her, like he refused to meet Jeremy Cried at the time. And most of these Pandilla members are described in this book Slip as, in my view, seeming short on time, short on patience, also short on precise memory probably. But what they collectively do say is that the swimming photo is real actually, and that it was taken on April 4th of 2014. So on the very day that Osman Valenzuela died at this Caldera River, or in the area of the Caldera River, in the presence of his friends, Milagros, Edwin, Henry and others who are now interviewed by Annette. And as you could hear in the podcast from Jeremy Cried, Osman's mother, Margarita, has declared that the same Pandilla group had been threatening Osman in the days prior, and that he was also killed at the Caldera, which we know is a fact. And he was found with a wound to the back of the head coming from being hit by something, and he drowned. Initially it was ruled an accident, but it was later overturned and considered murder. So going by this book, this swimming photo is actually a real photo, and the Pandilla members now reluctantly tell Annette in this book that it was taken on one of their tablets, tablet of Xenia. But according to this group, it are not Chris and Lisanne who are pictured. I had to really laugh when I read who they claim are actually pictured here. Standing on the right are Murgas and Jorge, they say, and crouching in the water are apparently Milagros and her friend Sandra C. And I can see that Juan and I may have mistaken Osman for Jorge, because they're really similar in looks, but we're really supposed to believe here that this figure that looks exactly like Lisanne is in fact Milagros. I mean, I show you a photo now, and I'm sure you can find more than 100 differences. Quote from this book Slip: I asked Milagros if she even knows about the photo, and of course, she remembers, to my astonishment, the exact date it was taken. It was on April 4th, 2014, when we were swimming in the Chiriquisito River. You remember that exactly? Something bad happened that day. A friend of mine died that day, Osman Valenzuela. He drowned that afternoon in the Chiriquisito River, where the photo was taken. Annette asks, is Osman in the photo? Milagros looks at the picture. No, he's not, she says. Then she points her finger at all the people in the photo in turn. This one is Murdoch, nickname from Murgas. Next to him is Jorge. She points to the dark-haired girl that so many people think is Lisanne. That's me. And next to it, that's my friend Sandra. I'm surprised at how quickly, easily and precisely you can get information. End quote. Okay then, if that's how you think you get concrete and truthful information. Annette then continues, quote, only later do I realize that tens of thousands of people think something else, namely the wrong thing, about this very photo, and how much damage is at caused. At the same time, I'm happy and relieved that Chris and Lisanne are not supposed to be in the picture. I feel a bit silly now, but I ask anyway if the missing Dutch girls were there that day, just to be sure. Nonsense, says Milagros. He's already looking after her children again, as if this is a minor matter. Immediately afterwards, she hurries back into the house. I mean, come on, I feel silly too now, but on Annette's behalf for believing this nonsense without reservation, but it gets worse. But Annette knows enough. The swimming photo was not taken on April 1st, 2014, so it has nothing to do with Lisanne and Chris. And most importantly, they are not in the photo at all. I'm entirely convinced I'm on the right track. End quote. So I wonder if she inspected that swimming photo and a picture of what Sandra, nicknamed Xixi, and Milagros, what they looked like at the time, because I have, and I can't believe that the authors just accepted that statement. And you can see the photos for yourself. I kind of anonymized her with the eyes, but this below photo of these two ladies was taken on August 14th of 2014, so around the same time, and either the Pandilla are taking the mickey out of these two German authors, or they all collectively think their audience are blind or stupid or something, because, I mean, no offense, but Milagros looks nothing like Lisanne, or the Lisanne type of figure seen in that photo, and the same goes for Sandra and Chris. I just don't see how these are the same women. There's so many differences. The skin color is different, the hair color is different, body types, very different facial features. In fact, when Annette talks to Sandra, she herself also initially cannot believe it is her who's pictured. Annette has to remind her of this, which is absurd. A quote from the book when Annette talks to this Pandilla member Sandra C. Quote, she recognizes the others, the same as Milagros and Henry. What she doesn't remember, however, is whether she is the person next to Milagros. It could be me, says Sandra, and explains the crux of the photo. You can't recognize the faces. But I remember exactly that I was in a few of the photos back then. She shrugs her shoulders. But in this one, I really can't say for sure. Well, neither can anybody else. I mean, the only similarity I can find is the V sign made by both women in photos. And did Sandra also not remember dyeing her hair orange at the time? As you can see in photo from August, she has dark hair, she doesn't have orange hair. So you would think that someone can remember dyeing their hair orange, but probably not. And Annette shows no curiosity either in that respect. She doesn't ask about it. And honestly, why is Annette, a German, a foreigner, trying to help this Sandra person out with a photo that was taken of her? And Sandra is the one who claimed she was there on that carefree afternoon. Annette appears to have partly placed words in her mouth, we think. And it's also interesting that Sandra did not initially meet with Annette, but only later was ready for her interview. So you do wonder, was she coached beforehand by the Pandilla members? I mean, we don't know, but it's very strange this. But Sandra does remember the death of Osman, quote, but she remembers the most important thing. The photo was taken on a carefree afternoon at Chiriquisito where the friends went swimming. Children were also there. Osman went behind a rock because he needed to relieve himself there and did not return. When darkness fell, but that's in the book, they gave up the search for him and called the police. Sandra knows nothing about a quarrel within the clique that is said to have cost Osman his life. And Lisanne and Chris? She looks at me blankly. The idea that the two Dutch girls could have been involved is so far-fetched. None of us have ever met them, she says, or even seen them. So of course they are not in the photo either. She recognizes the others, the same as Milagros and Henry. Unfortunately, she can't remember who took the photo. And then it gets more wild, quote, but, says Sandra, lowering her voice, there is something mysterious about this photo. She then talks about silhouettes that are said to have been visible in the swimming photo and other pictures from the afternoon. Similar to ghosts, something paranormal, she says. Are people with blurred faces and unrecognizable? In my mind, Annette says, I dismissed the statement because I don't believe in paranormal phenomena. But a few days later, my skepticism matures when I meet with the lawyer who investigated the circumstances of Osman's death to find out more. He also tells me about unexplained apparitions and outlines in the photos. Unfortunately, we've not been able to find the other photos from April 4th, 2014. How convenient. What is behind these claims? No sooner has one secret been revealed than another pops up. So that is also a scientifically acceptable way, apparently, for Hardinghouse and Nenner to explain away this swimming photo. Even if the women look absolutely nothing alike, we can always resort to paranormal events that very afternoon to make it all fit together. This was just laughable, I'm sorry. All the other swimming photos are gone, we're told. So they made a whole series of photos. They all look ghostly, they all look haunted for paranormal reasons. On the same afternoon that Osman goes behind a rock to relieve himself and poof, goes up in air, probably also a paranormal event, according to the people who are accused of his murder. And to think about the fact that this was their friend, supposedly, Osman, who died that exact day, and somehow everyone deleted or lost all of those other photos of their afternoon together swimming. Nobody saved anything anywhere, only this specific one photo survived. It makes no sense. Why would someone leak that photo if it's all paranormal nonsense? It's just stupid. And I'm even more disappointed that Annette doesn't ask any of these difficult questions. I mean, there's no critical questions at all. She accepts whatever she's told at face value. It's just, how can she believe this? How can this not be alarming to her, what she's hearing here? But it gets even better. When Annette talks to another supposed Pandilla member called Alba C, another friend at least of this Pandilla clique, she says that it is in fact not Sandra who is standing in the swimming photo in the place of Chris, but Osman Valenzuela himself. Book quote: Alba looks at the swimming photo, repeating the names I've already heard. Only one is different, so I can hardly believe my ears. And to the bottom left of Milagros is Osman, she says. Quote. So this is not a bombshell breakthrough, apparently. Milagros and Osman are arm in arm, standing in the deeper water. I mean, to her credit, Annette does scratches her head initially when she hears this, but then she quickly comes to the Pandilla's defense again, states that the photo is so distorted and blurred that you can interpret anything and everything in it. Yeah. That's a cop-out, come on. She says the reddish glow that is supposed to show Chris's hair could well be a reflection of the rock in the background. And Alba is convinced that's Osman for sure. I know that because we all talked about his distorted face later. So to me, the Pandilla clique seems to have discussed this visit of Annette beforehand, because group friend Xenia Pei, which is Milagros' cousin, we found out, she also says that the figure with seemingly red hair is in fact Osman. Quote, there were these strange phenomena on all of them. Osman's face was always altered, strangely twisted, or even completely unrecognizable. That's why they talked about it for a long time among friends. Haunted photographs. How anyone can see Osman in the figure of Chris is just beyond me, but Annette is already sold on it. Quote, there's hardly any doubt in my mind now. No one has colluded here, nor has anyone tried to pull the wool over my eyes. Okay then. And the dude on the left is now suddenly supposedly pictured on the right of the photo with a red glow, but not from red hair, but from the color of the rocks reflecting. Our Pixie wrote about this. Right, that solved this legend then, has it, Annette? And all it took was asking this group who was in the photo, that nobody for the past 10 years could make out or match or identify. Of course there is a potential weakness in interviewing people with a stake in this 10 years after the fact. And with this case being covered internationally the way it is. I mean, many people who believe these girls got lost, they say you cannot even believe witness statements made a week after the fact, let alone 10 years. So anyway, I mean, it's clear that to me, I believe that the people in these photos resemble, the two seated ones in the water resemble Chris and Lisanne. Absolutely. We know this photo is supposedly real, not a Photoshop, as far as we've been told, also by the families. And now the Pandilla themselves, they admitted it's a real photo. It's just they do not agree who's pictured in it. I'm very aware of the weakness of this theory that it were Chris and Lisanne, because there's no forensic evidence, there's no phone log evidence that Chris and Lisanne ever were at that swimming location at all. Witnesses saw women who looked like them there. That's the only report we have, and police did check the caldera out, but they found nothing. But Chris and Lisanne made no photos there as far as we know. They did not mention it in either of their diaries or to other people. There's also no indication in these phone logs, like I said, that they went to this location. Several witnesses did claim to police to have seen Chris and Lisanne at the caldera on Monday, which was reported in the media, and police did go there to look for them. When people claim this photo to be fake, they seem to skirt past the necessary follow-up questions, in my view, which are who created that fake photo then, and why, and when, and why was it leaked, and why was it the only one which survives, supposedly, from this series of photos that day that was taken? For some reason, not many people seem interested in these questions at all. I don't know why, but there is just no easy dismissal of the swimming photo in my book. I honestly don't care how many people tell me it aren't Chris and Lisanne, or how someone made a Photoshop. I mean, who would have done that and why? But now the PANDILLA deny it is a Photoshop and say it is a real photo, so I may only ever change my mind when a reliable photo of these doppelgangers of them are presented, and so far nobody has. And I just fail to understand why these short interviews are considered as the ultimate evidence, because what if it were Chris and Lisanne pictured in them, and then this photo was of course not from April 4th, but from March 31st maybe. I mean, do they really believe these PANDILLA members are going to admit to that? Admit to having been with them? Admit to having swum with them? Dragging themselves into this narrative? I don't think so. And then we haven't even covered the statements from reluctant Henry, the stepson of the tour guide. Annette writes, Feliciano took a long time to persuade him because first he didn't want to talk to me. Unfortunately, we don't hear what exactly persuaded Henry to talk after all. I mean, wouldn't it have been nice to eavesdrop on that conversation? But he does eventually, and Annette portrays him as a victim. Slip authors do seem to glide entirely past whatever reasons they may have actually be for some suspicion, but anyway, we know that already. So she describes him in very flowery, positive wording, like the dad. And then he also denies everything. Quote, he hasn't been to any parties or on any hikes with Lisanne and Chris. He hasn't even met them. He has never seen or talked to them. And Osman just retreated behind a rock that day to do his business and never came back. They had all looked for him in vain, according to Henry. But indirectly, he does place himself on the scene of this death, basically. I mean, Osman, he disappears while in this company of Henry and his friends, and he's found dead hours later, and a year later, Murgas is in their company in his final hours, and he is found dead, killed by a car. It sounds like they let it pass them, without any impact. Close friends. Annette seems not suspicious at all of this link. She then uses one of the people she interviews, Alba, to really describe Mariano Atencio, the colleague of Jeremy Cried in his podcast series, in a very negative light. Annette writes that Alba said about Mariana, quote, Alba pantomimes how Mariana adjusts certain parts of her body before calling Henry. At the time, she pursed her lips, wiggled her upper body, and stuck her cell phone in front of her for a selfie. This is how she tried to entice Henry to come to the bar. Well, it's amazing that Annette achieved to talk to Henry and Mariana with all her glamour and, desperate attempts. She could not. This is like gloating. This is just, to me, very unpleasant to read. This anecdote, supposedly, is just added to ridicule Mariana based on the way she looks and behaves. And it's one thing to aim arrows at their work, their professional work. That's fine. Well, I didn't agree with that either, but that's one thing. But to mock her appearance and her mannerisms, to write it down through the convenient words of this Alba, it just does not come across as fair to me. Why Annette is a woman herself, I believe, and why would she attack Mariana in that way? Besides, does she ever wonder how people will talk about her or even mimic her after she left Phuket, after all the smooching up to the tour guide? Probably not, but that works both ways as well, just very unprofessional. So anyway, we believe this chapter was quite weak, also hilarious in a bad way. Not enough critical questions were asked, too much bias from Annette and afterwards also from Christian Hardinghouse probably. They write themselves that the Pandilla from Bouquet is generally thought to have 7 members and that only 4 of them are still alive today. I mean, do they not find that remarkable? Does that not warrant questions? Apparently not. These are all young people. Just like this bizarre story that the Pandilla members sold Annette about Osman and just relieving himself and going up in air in mysterious ways. It makes no sense, but they're not asked any critical questions. It's just not the sort of thing you expect from very critical investigational journalists. And something which Dave especially noticed and highlighted is this rather cold and cynical approach from the authors, especially from Annette towards Margarita and the murdered Osman. The story is heartbreaking, in fact. It's chilling, but it's just like they brush past it in a very cold manner. Very strange. The main sympathy we could detect was for the tour guide and his son, and for Eileen perhaps. Chris and Lisanne are mentioned, of course, but they do not seem to be the main subject of this book, which brings me to another subtopic, namely their ferocious criticism on Jeremy Crichton and his podcast. Later fished out of the river dead. We cannot confirm that Osman's death, which, according to the autopsy report, was caused by a blow to the back of the head, was subsequently classified as murder by the authorities, as various people claim. As with almost all previous crime and accident theories, it is once again Jeremy Crichton who is fueling this rumor. Quote. It's quite extreme to say that, as with almost all previous. The cause of death of Osman was officially drowning, but investigators believe he was knocked unconscious and pushed or thrown into the river, which is what led to him drowning. Mariana says, and this is critical information because, as we learned in the episode, his death was then ruled a homicide. So the podcast also claims that Osman had suffered a non-lethal hemorrhagic party theory. The host may not shy away from buying fake statements. R, an indigenous inhabitant of Pueblo Santos, a village behind Alto Romero on the way to the coast, tells Annette about a corresponding offer. So if you're gonna accuse someone, why are you saying may not shy away? I mean, you want to say that he was bribing people, right? So it's probably not true, but they don't provide any evidence. So another quote about Jeremy Crichton. Crichton and Atencio's informant Tony visited him in his village, presented him with a letter containing a prefabricated statement and offered him money if he would read out the statements formulated on it and allow himself to be recorded. Fortunately, Eyre has enough integrity to turn down this immoral offer. So Dave said, here we go, these are about the most serious accusations you can make of someone and their work, but let's look at it. An anonymous indigenous man. Why would Tony approach this man and offer him money, and how did Annette ever get this tip? Where did it come from and why? They don't give any context, like who told them that and what their motives may be. Annette, she said herself, she knew nothing about this case until maybe, was it a few weeks or so before she went to Bouquet. Suddenly, she knows all the ins and outs of what Jeremy Cried was up to. Okay, one more. Slip quote. We imagine Cried with a few bills in hand trying to find people willing to mime a crime scene cleaner, but of course we would never say that. How naughty. It seems quite possible that the podcast contains purchased statements. Again, it seems quite possible. I mean, they attack him, but they quite shrewdly just weave it into this may perhaps, and then they still attack him, so I don't know. So Dave M was especially annoyed by this. He wrote, "What you're doing in this book is bordering on libelous. You have offered not a stitch of proof for these slanders. I know what you're doing here. I know you're flinging as much mud and smoke at Cried and his podcast as you humanly can in order to demolish him and those podcasts. But the problem you have is that you're going so enormously over the top with it that you stopped any chance of making your case feel plausible. It began on page 66 and it hasn't really stopped." So, yeah. He also said Cried has kept with the disappearance of Lisanne and Chris for 8 years now, chipping away, trying to penetrate the walls of secrecy that exist in Bouquet. I think he has done a good job on the whole, trying to make progress on a cold case like this in a foreign land like Panama. It's like running up a mountain basically, and how much of Margarita's story is true, well, it's hard to say, but Jeremy Cried is not a gangster, I think, so, and not a career con man, so this is... He earned some respect, and people may not agree with what he proposes as a theory, but Christian is also active on Reddit. I think Annette is not, but he also wrote there, "Devotees of true crime stories have an insatiable appetite for dramatic storytelling, and the entertainment industry is well aware that such intense drama can be profitable. It is therefore hardly surprising that even renowned journalists are occasionally tempted to spread dubious stories to gain maximum attention. The US podcast Lost in Panama with its host Jeremy Cried and Mariana Atencio is a striking example of this phenomenon." I mean, come on, how about your own theory about Mr. M? I mean, that's also sensational. And Dave wrote about that. "Think on how this book was put together. Annette admits in her first logbook she has only been familiar with Chris and Lisanne for a few weeks, so she is sent to Bouquet to contact a list of people. We see her meet Milagros, Henry, etc. We see her hearing how Osman just vanished. We see her hear Martin Ferreira describe what happened to Chris and Lisanne in gory detail. We see she meets Margarita face to face and hears her relate the story of how her son died. She told Jeremy Cried about it, and when you think about that journey Annette took and understand that her meeting with Margarita should have put her meetings with Henry, Milagros and these others into some sort of a perspective, how can you sit there and listen to Margarita face to face? Listen to that bizarre story of how a scared and threatened Osman went behind a rock and left behind a bemused Pandilla, and not feel that you've just experienced something that is both sad and quite disturbing. But not these two, honestly. The thought of Cried's podcast having fueled the production of this book is even coming to mind at this point, and I have to agree. I mean, there's this feeling with this book that there is a whole lot of emotion and empathy for a couple of people, but not for others, because it has become polarized. Christian writes flat Cried conspiracies and fairy tales. It starts to feel like there's some personal vendetta, and I don't know. And then he says, "The true story about the Pandilla and Osman's death is now known. We have published it and we can prove it." Well, I didn't see any proof in this book. I don't know what you're holding back, but the idea that Chris and Lisanne figures in the photo are actually Osman and Milagros, then no, that's no evidence, that's no proof. That's nonsense. But okay, I mean, everyone who takes a stand or who has a theory in this case, the whole thing is polarized. And the people who stay neatly in the middle, they are also seen as weak and not opinionated. So you're almost forced to take a stand. Do you support that they got lost, had an accident, or do you support that they were kidnapped or met foul play? These authors are actually in the camp of foul play. They think that Chris and Lisanne were kidnapped, but they look in a different direction from Jeremy Cried and Osman's mother Margarita. So it's just inevitable with this case. It seems that people get riled up and see the other team as an enemy. So it's a shame. They also think it's a shame from what I read, but if they think it's a shame, then this way of writing is not helping at all. But in the end, I think I really did appreciate the book actually. I appreciated one of the authors having gone to Boquete, having shared details from these case files, which we didn't know yet, or correct details in the case files. Much appreciated. I also liked that they were critical towards people like Betsaida Pity and the other author duo. It's just the second part of the book that felt a bit off to us, but I'm sure there are lots of people who do enjoy it and do agree with it, so not every book has to be neutral. I do have an issue with these case files. I know this may sound as if I'm just jealous that I don't have them. I don't have the money for them because some people bought them. I don't have connections. I don't know how Crichton and Hardinghouse got their copies of all these files. With the Dutch duo, it seems logical that they got it from Betsaida Pity because she was a co-author, which I think is very unethical because she was fired from the job already in January 2015. So there are a couple of people who have these files now that we know of, maybe more than I know of actually. And yeah, the question comes up, these are confidential files, so how come several commercial authors have copies of them? Imperfect Plan have copies of them, Jeremy Crichton had copies of them, the Canadians have them, and maybe more. So what's going on here? Either these case files should remain confidential and secret, or in my view, given how many people already have them now, they should be shared with the world. Because in this book, Hardinghouse and Nenner, they use a lot of notes, footnotes and source mentionings, which is great, very academic. But as I said before, the problem is none of us readers can actually verify their source links. And Hardinghouse, he said about that on Reddit again. He said that his footnotes or notes can be verified by investigators and scientists, and that those who like to speculate are not their target group, which, I don't know, it's strange. Which investigators and scientists is he talking about? And he sells his book to an audience who doesn't have these case files, so this sounds a bit snobbish. Like, I mean, you may pay me money to get the book, but yeah, you're not the elite who can actually verify the source links. So I understand that this is an improvement absolutely to the Dutch duo, who provided 0 source links, so it was a big mess of personal opinions, fabrications and truths, but we didn't know which was which. So this is an improvement, but yeah, it feels a bit sour, to be honest, that some people who make money out of this have access to these files. And I think by now, because none of these people actually come to the same conclusions, that's interesting as well, that various factors, this author duo, the Dutch author duo, Crichton, and even Imperfect Plan, I don't think they all come to the same conclusion about even what's in these case files. Because quite a bit of the book is also dedicated to correcting the book of the Dutch authors and how they nitpicked from these case files, which I did appreciate a lot actually, the way they handled that, because it's quite insightful, and I trust Hardinghouse and Nenner more with these case files than the Dutch duo. I don't know why, maybe because they were so obviously trying to whitewash this horrible investigation of co-author Betsaida Pity. So I've been dealt with, I feel, after reading this book. And in general, we still don't know where Chris and Lisanne went between roughly 1 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. on Monday afternoon. There's no cell phone data, there's no Wi-Fi location known, their exact whereabouts then, pretty bizarre. Same for Tuesday morning, we don't know where they went to have breakfast or whatever before going up to Pianista. Lost in the Jungle claims that Chris and Lisanne went to Café Nelvis in the morning before heading to the Pianista, and the slip authors say that they made this up and that it's not specified at all in the case files or in the phone logs where they went. So there's no evidence for Café Nelvis, they say, which is, wow, it's very specific. So I have a suspicion that maybe the Dutch authors had another source that the Germans don't know about, but nobody gave an explanation for this. Neither of the author duos have explained this. Jürgen, the Dutch author, he refused to answer it on Reddit, so it's a mystery. But then an explanation for these dozen-plus witnesses who all claimed to have seen Chris and Lisanne on the Pianista Trail in the afternoon of April 1st. And we know they technically couldn't, because the phone logs show that Chris and Lisanne weren't at the trailhead. They were on the Pianista, on the Mirador and beyond. Their phones never reconnected to the cell network, and they would have if they had come down again. So the general assumption is that they never came down again. So those are a lot of witnesses who claim to have seen them that afternoon. What's going on here? Why? Why is it not explained yet? Why so many people are wrong? Look, and I know that a lot of people say, well, witnesses are renowned for being unreliable, okay, but these are a lot of people and they were interviewed quite quickly after the disappearance, so it does warrant an explanation, I think. Just like 10 years after the fact, we still don't know why Ingrid Lommers claimed that a teacher and an employee saw Chris and Lisanne left Spanish by the River around 1 p.m. on the same April 1st. Basically the same thing. How can two employees see them leave around 1 p.m. when they were already on a Mirador then? According to the photos and the phone data, we don't even know who these two witnesses were in the school. Why has this never been asked or verified? Why Ingrid, I think she stayed out of it completely, aside from in the beginning using Facebook messages to, motivate people to look. But other than that, she just went back on with her business. Staying with the school, there's also the ongoing issue of Eileen, the German intern, having ever-changing memories and telling one set of authors one thing and another set of authors another thing. For instance, when she last saw Chris and Lisanne, to one she said it was Monday afternoon, and the other German authors say she's like, oh, she was traumatized and poor girl. And I think there's quite a pattern here again with just constantly contradicting oneself. And if it was just with one person in this case, contradicting things, it is honestly beyond our understanding why all the author claims to be independent investing. Quote, I still remember very well, I saw the girls for the last time. One was lying in a hammock, the other was standing by a map of the Spanish school, looking where they could go. Hola, I yelled at them. This was right before they disappeared, so I'll add a link to the article below the video. Quite clear, May 13th, so it was quite fresh. But then, for some reason, Hardinghouse and Nenner ignored everything. Hardinghouse and Nenner, they just don't accept it. They're in denial. They write, quote, Chris and Lisanne have never actually had the chance to meet Feliciano, nor has he ever seen or spoken to the two women. No, he said himself that he did. But that quote is nowhere in the book. They completely eliminated that quote from their book. It's nowhere. So in 2016, KOUDEKAAS told Jeremy Cried, actually, according to Cried, which the German authors will probably say is a lie, but Cried wrote, quote from the tour guide, I met the Hollandesas in town, but never saw them after that. And Cried also wrote, witnesses saw this same guide with Chris and Lisanne less than 24 hours before they disappeared on the campus of an all-inclusive language school called Spanish by the River, where the women were staying in Boquet. During that meeting, he offered them a full package tour, including a guided hike up this nearby continental divide and an overnight stop at his ranch deep in the jungle on the far side of the mountains. For unknown reasons, the woman declined. Well, that's never been proven, so that may be false. But yeah, you cannot just wipe out this whole statement of having met them, and it's quite detailed. The hola, hammock, map. Why would he have made that up? So he actually said in a much later interview in July of 2022 to a Dutch newspaper, quote from KOUDEKAAS, I never met the girls, but they said I was the last to see them. So there he doesn't say, oh, I actually said myself that I was the last to see them. No, it's now everyone else who accuses him of. So I won't call it gaslighting, but it's getting in that territory. Chris and Lisanne had interaction with in those few days they were in Boquet is important or warrants attention. But for unknown reasons, the authors do this with quite a few things KOUDEKAAS related. One quote we found is that they write, quote, all hotels and companies such as Spanish by the River ended their collaboration with him after the tragedy in 2014, so with the tour guide. Acquaintances and even some relatives have also withdrawn after the accusations were made. They also wrote that the rumor mills in Boquet were working overtime at the time, and yet these authors in one breath write that no one in Boquet was saying he was involved in any way with the disappearance. There is no evidence that locals suspected Feliciano, quote. Which is a bit of a strange conclusion, I think. Another quote, and you don't even have to look far for them in Boquet. As soon as you open your mind a little to the Boqueteños and ask around, you realize that nobody suspects Feliciano. And then a few chapters later they write, quote, in the first few weeks after the disappearance of Chris and Lisanne, Feliciano and a local group of perpetrators are suspected of having done something to the Dutch women. You just said that never happened, so which of the two is it? Was he suspected or not? And about his stepson, quote, however, it was well known in Boquete that the main suspects were Henry and his buddy Sam D, who kept making allusions in bars about his knowledge of a crime against Chris and Lisanne. Other locals also put Sam forward as a suspect early on. According to them, he and Henry met the girls the day before they disappeared and were seen with them. Next quote, we learned from the files that the police themselves also became aware of Pandilla by investigating the rumors against Henry and Sam. So there were suspicions both about the guide and his stepson. But they began the chapter by saying that no one was gossiping or linking these people to the disappearance. Remember here also Jeremy Crichton's first visit of Boquete in 2016. He was writing in the Daily Beast at the time that stories were swirling around this man, Guide F, in the town gossip. It wasn't Westerners or internet detectives, I guess. It was locals in Boquete itself who started the whole suspicion train. And why was he dropped from the school in 2014 already? They don't explain that. Why would that be? Because they worked with him all the time. Every student there was basically told he was their go-to guide for all their tours. So how can you say no one is suspecting him of anything when he's fired? Or the work relation is stopped so suddenly? Doesn't mean he's guilty of anything. It's not like he's not mentioned in Boquete at the time, which is their claim. So Dave wrote, if only Annette had thought to ask Henry for the truth, or where he himself was in April 2014 while all this was going on. Notice that Henry isn't anywhere in April or June. He does not help his father at any point looking for these missing Dutch tourists as far as we know. He isn't even there in early August when his father takes several other assistants to show the Kramers' parents where their daughter was last known to have walked. What is Henry's take on the strange disappearance of Osman? How afraid was he that he too could meet his sudden and strange fate as his buddies Osman and Morgas did? The attrition rate that year for the Pandilla was incredibly high. That had to have been very alarming for this small band of friends to deal with. These things can clip your mind, but none of that appears from these Pandilla interviews. It's strange. I mean, why wouldn't you ask that? Why is it only like, oh, he loves his puppy and he has great eyes? I don't understand. Maybe perhaps Annette had enough to deal with in simply asking all these members about that one photo, Dave says. Perhaps there simply wasn't time for other questions. Well, we don't know. But yeah, there could have been more asked probably. But they give the tour guide the glossy treatment. I think if they just covered everything that's known, instead of just ignoring things, it would have not looked suspicious. For instance, they also leave out of the book that the local police flagged some of the tour guide's interview statements and behaviors, including him forcing entrance into the bedroom, as suspicious. Also the fact that the backpack was found in a certain area, not that far from his finca ranch, and that's also another one where we had a chuckle because Hardinghouse and Nanner literally write, quote, Feliciano does not own a ranch in the area where Chris and Lisanne may have disappeared, end quote. And only to fully contradict themselves a few chapters later, admitting that he does actually, quote, owns a small piece of land in Alto Romero and does have a finca. Another quote, however, none of this happened at Cuervo's house, but at Feliciano's finca near the village of Alto Romero. Was nobody proofreading the book? Your main point was that Feliciano does not own a ranch in the area where Chris and Lisanne may have disappeared. I just didn't understand that. But even the Dutch authors who were really protective of the tour guide, even they admitted that he has a finca near Alto Romero. There was really no denying it, but this way is just strange. Hardinghouse also writes that Guide F was not involved in any of the remain findings, when in fact the tour guide himself says in an interview, we found the remains and they didn't even say thank you for your help. No, they only came in helicopter to pick it up in 2 minutes. The Dutch reporter Britta Sanders said in a reportage, Feliciano is a guide in the area and has a farm there. Together with 3 Indians and a team of 6 from Boquete, he went out looking because he felt the authorities did far too little. The man who found the backpack of Chris and Lisanne also is disappointed in the officials. The remains were all found near the River Culebra by ordinary people such as Feliciano. So even Lost in the Jungle says, a few days after the discovery of the backpack, Lisanne's shoe containing her food is found by Feliciano and a few other local men. Well, there are far more quotes. He was involved in a lot of these remain findings, either alone or probably with his team. But Christian just writes that he was not involved in any of it. He wasn't involved in any of the remain findings, which is just, you cannot rewrite history. It's documented, he was. They also introduced this presumed hospital visit in David on Tuesday morning of the tour guide. We already read about it in the Dutch book also. They were the first ones to write about it. I didn't know about it. So apparently he had an appointment with Marjolein, who was the employee at Spanish by the River, on Tuesday morning, so the day of the disappearance. At 7 a.m. they would already drive together to David. The tour guide would drop Marjolein off at the bus station so she could take the bus to Costa Rica to go to one of the schools there, which Ingrid runs. And now we learned that the tour guide had an appointment in a hospital in David. And they used this as an alibi. Guide F cannot have been implicated in the disappearance of Chris and Lisanne because he had to be in David on Tuesday morning to go to a hospital visit. He was not in Boquete when Chris and Lisanne went missing. He was in David in a hospital. But not even this makes sense because he and Marjolein have said to leave Boquete at 7 a.m. So like I said, he dropped her off, reportedly went to this hospital. No evidence, not even evidence of an appointment. We don't know what sort of appointment. We don't know how long he stayed there. We do know that by car it's no more than 45 minutes to get back to Boquete. We know that he dropped Marjolein off. We don't know if he went to the hospital visit, so he could have gone straight back to Boquete in theory. Or he could have his appointments. Didn't need to have big surgery probably, so appointments can go rather quickly. And with a 45-minute car drive, he could have been back in Boquete by 9 anyway. Or 10. So I mean, logically, how is this evidence that he had no way to be around when Chris and Lisanne disappeared around 1 p.m. or after 1 p.m. in Boquete? It's just so strange to read these wobbly illogical arguments of theirs sometimes. Part of the book is really good, but this is just, I don't understand it. I mean, by our calculations, by anyone's calculations, he may even have had time to see Chris and Lisanne in that hammock, checking that map, which he said he did. Although I have to say, they do provide some evidence, some proof. It's just not proof in my eyes, but they believe it's proof. Quote, however, Feliciano tells us that his son stood in for him on the day of the disappearance because he was in hospital. As evidence, Feliciano shows a calendar entry that supports this statement. And that should be the end of the matter. But a hand-scribbled calendar without a date or timestamp on it is, of course, not very convincing evidence, I think. You also have to know here that this local journalist Adelita Corriat, who was butchered by Pity and the Dutch authors because she was so critical of Bedside of Pity, in her pretty good journalistic writings actually, she wrote at the time that Guide F and his stepson were in fact behind the Mirador on Tuesday afternoon. We cannot verify if that's true, but I just leave it out there. So I could make a complete new video about how they give Eileen and Marjolein also this softball treatment. No, it's for another time. Basically it comes down to Eileen giving this very wildly varying recollections of what happened. I already touched on that. And she's giving an excuse by the authors. They say we have no reason to doubt Eileen's credibility. It was a very intense period that still affects her life. Traumatic experiences are often remembered imprecisely. It can lead to inaccuracies, confusion. Yeah, okay. So, this is truly the end of this video. I'm sorry that it took so long, but concluding, I do think the authors did a good job overall, especially the first half of the book, especially with regards to highlighting the errors of Pity, of the Dutch duo, filling in more details from the case files. It was mainly the handling of the Pandilla and the swimming photo and the tour guides and even Eileen that left something to be desired, we thought. And coming back to the ultimate question, what happened to Chris and Lisanne? Well, we both believe that they were kidnapped, but who could have kidnapped Chris and Lisanne? Power Pixie Dave and I, we just don't believe the Mr. M and the Red Truck theory ultimately. It's a very interesting theory. We're really happy to read more about this from the case files through this book, but to us, that theory lacks a motive a bit. There's also no precedent for this behavior presented. If we are to believe this was the random work of opportunity of a psychopath living on that trail, it's also a telling sign to us that there is no known repeat offense on the pianista. We also lack more specific witness statements or people speaking out after the fact about this Mr. M. Quite telling to us that nobody, as far as anyone knows who's not in Bouquet, has ever leaked information about this Mr. M. Only the witnesses that are now speaking out in this book, but no one else, which is quite a contrast with just how many people have spoken out about this Pandilla. Even I got various emails from locals about them, way before the books came out, in the early days. But for what it's worth, of course, because everyone is innocent until proven otherwise, and none of us have ever proved any guilt. Neither did the German authors, even though they suspect Mr. M. But this is just theories, keep that in mind. But for us, the Pandilla theory of Jeremy Crichton's podcast and the recollections of Margarita, Osman's mother, they're still the more convincing ones. We do believe that Chris and Lisanne were followed, unseen by persons who knew they were there and who knew they had planned to head up the Pianista together. And that's why we have special interest for anyone who knew that Chris and Lisanne had the plan to hide the Pianista that day. And we think that they would certainly have fought back one person. These were especially Lisanne, very tall, fit. Yeah, they're quite tall for Panamanian standards, young people. So one lonely psychopath, unless he had a gun, I don't know. I think they could have ran away, or at least one of them. But when they're dealing with, let's say, 4 known acquaintances, 1 or 2 of whom they may have met earlier already and put some trust in, perhaps shared a joke with in the past or stories with, that is the theory about the Pandilla, basically, the Pandilla attack. And it makes just more practical sense to us. But no one knows what happened. This is just a theory linking to the podcast of Jeremy Crichton. I don't think this book wiped the theory away. Maybe it tried to, but to us it didn't. So thanks for listening, for those who are still listening. Yeah, I would still recommend reading the book for yourself, reading my blog post about it, which is really detailed. But even that blog post is just quotes from the book, of course. If you want to read the whole thing, then just buy it. It was very well written. Yeah, you get a little bit of what we thought about it now, but it's still worth reading it for yourself. So take care. Bye-bye.